Notification sound on my phone used to mean nothing. A text from the hardware store. Maybe a reminder about my blood pressure medication. But the morning my son-in-law Derek called to say I should come live with them, it changed everything, though I didn't know it yet. I'm Walter, 68 years old, retired electrician, 22 years with the same utility company before my knees gave me a reason to stop climbing poles. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, and since then I'd been managing just fine in our old house in Greenville, South Carolina. The neighbors knew me, the hardware store guys knew my name. I had my routines, my woodworking projects in the garage, my Sunday phone call for my daughter Claire. Claire was 34, married to Derek for 6 years. He was a corporate attorney in Atlanta, the kind of man who wore a suit to a backyard barbecue and made sure you noticed his watch. Smart, polished, always with the right thing to say at the right moment. I'd never disliked him exactly, but I'd never fully relaxed around him either. I told myself that was just the father-in-law thing. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sanding a rocking chair in the garage when my phone buzzed on the workbench. "Walter, it's Derek." His voice carried that practiced warmth, the kind lawyers develop like a professional skill. "Claire and I have been talking, and we both feel strongly that you shouldn't be alone in that house, especially with winter coming." I set down my sandpaper. "I've been alone in that house for 4 years, Derek. We know, and we admire your independence. But Claire worries constantly. You know how she is." A pause. "We have the guest suite. It's just sitting there. You'd have your own bathroom, your own entrance to the backyard. We'd love to have you." Before I could respond, Claire came on the line. She sounded lighter than she had in months, her voice lifting in a way that reminded me of when she was 16 and wanted something she knew I might refuse. "Daddy, please. I'd sleep so much better knowing you're here. We have the space. Derek's been asking me to call you about this for weeks." Derek had been asking. That surprised me. "What brought this on?" I asked. "The Hendersons on your street had a break-in last month," Claire said, "and you're all alone in that big house. It just doesn't make sense when we have room." I spent 2 days thinking about it. What I missed most about life with Carol wasn't the big things, it was someone to eat breakfast with. Someone who noticed when you came home. I packed 3 suitcases and a box of woodworking tools, put the Greenville house in the hands of a property manager, and drove north to Atlanta. Their home was impressive in the way that expensive things are. Impressive. A 4-bedroom colonial in Buckhead. Immaculate landscaping. A kitchen that looked like a magazine spread. Derek met me in the driveway with a firm handshake and carried one of my suitcases himself, which I noted. Claire hugged me for a long time on the front steps. She felt thinner than I remembered. Those first 2 weeks were good. I want to say that clearly, because what came later made it easy to forget. Claire made my favorite pot roast on the second night. Derek took me to his golf club on Saturday and introduced me to colleagues with what seemed like genuine pride. Claire's father, he'd say. Retired master electrician. 30 years in the field. He'd gotten the years wrong by 8, but the intention seemed kind. I settled into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the back porch. Afternoons in the garage where Derek had cleared a workbench for me. Evenings watching television in the guest suite or joining them for dinner. Derek worked long hours, often not home until 7 or 8. Claire filled her days with the house, with errands, with volunteer work at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. At least that's what she told me. It was the end of the second week when I noticed the library bags. Claire always came home from her volunteer shifts carrying a canvas tote with the Fulton County Library logo on the side. But one Thursday I happened to be near the front window when she pulled into the driveway, and I watched her sit in the car for almost 4 minutes before coming inside. When she walked through the door, her eyes were red. "Good session?" I asked. "Mm-hmm." She set the bag down without looking at me. "Kids were rowdy today." I didn't say anything else. But I noticed the bag never seemed to hold any books. Small things accumulated after that, the way they do when you're paying attention without meaning to. Claire had always been a confident woman. She'd negotiated her own car purchase at 22 without asking anyone for help. Had stood her ground in arguments with professors in college, had given a toast at her cousin's wedding that made a room full of strangers cry. But the Claire in this house moved differently. She measured things before she said them. She glanced toward the door when Derek was due home the way you glance at the sky when a storm might be coming. One morning I came into the kitchen early to find her on her hands and knees, cleaning something off the floor beneath the kitchen island. She startled so badly when she heard my footsteps that she knocked her head on the underside of the counter. "Just some olive oil," she said, laughing in a way that didn't fit the moment. "I'm so clumsy in the mornings." but her hands were shaking as she wrung out the cloth. Derek's moods were the weather of the house. On evenings when he came home satisfied, dinner was pleasant. He'd ask about my day, tell stories about colleagues, pour himself a scotch, and settle into the armchair like a man who owned everything in his sightline, which of course he did. But on harder nights, the atmosphere changed before he even got through the door. Claire would tense when she heard his car in the garage. Conversation at the table would become careful, specific. Like walking a path you know has weak spots. One night he sent his dinner back to the kitchen because the pasta was, in his words, gummy. Claire apologized quietly and made him something else. I sat at the table and said the pasta had tasted perfectly fine to me. Derek smiled at me across the table with his eyes doing something his mouth wasn't. "You're a good man, Walter," he said. "Loyal to the people you love." I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a warning. 3 weeks in, I started hearing it. The first time I dismissed it as a dream. A door somewhere in the house, opening and closing. Footsteps on the hardwood, muffled by the closed door of my suite. I lay still and listened, but heard only the air conditioning cycling off. My bedside clock read 11:47. The second time, I was certain I was awake. Footsteps on the stairs, not toward the bedrooms, but away from them. Then a sound I couldn't immediately identify. Something mechanical, low, a latch or a bolt. Then silence so complete I wondered again if I'd imagined it. I knew this house reasonably well by now. There was a door in the hallway near the laundry room that I'd assumed was a closet. I'd never tried the handle. When I mentioned it to Claire one afternoon, asking if that's where they kept the extra vacuum bags, she hesitated almost imperceptibly before answering. "That goes to the basement. Derek uses it for storage. He keeps it locked, has a lot of client files down there. Confidentiality reasons." It was a plausible answer. He was a lawyer. But the sounds kept coming. Not every night, but often enough. Always after 11. Always that same sequence. Footsteps. That soft mechanical sound which I eventually identified as a deadbolt being turned and then nothing. And in the mornings, Derek always appeared at breakfast looking like a man who'd slept soundly for 8 hours. Claire never mentioned hearing anything, and I stopped asking. What finally broke my willingness to wait and wonder was a Sunday afternoon in November. Derek had gone to his office even on Sundays, apparently, and Claire and I were sitting on the back porch with coffee. It was the most relaxed I'd seen her since I'd arrived. Her shoulders sat lower. She laughed at something I said, a real laugh, and for a few minutes she was my daughter again, the girl who used to sit on the tailgate of my truck and tell me everything on her mind. I asked her, quietly and without accusation, if she was happy. The laugh stopped. She looked at her coffee cup for a long time. "I'm fine, Daddy." "That's not what I asked." She looked up at me then, and what I saw in her face was something I recognized from my years managing electrical crews, the expression of a person who knows there's a fault in the system and has been pretending not to notice because fixing it seems more dangerous than leaving it alone. "I'm working through some things," she said finally. "Derek and I both are. Marriage is complicated. Claire, please." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Not today." I let it go, but I didn't stop watching. On a Tuesday night, the 3rd week of November, I lay fully clothed on top of my covers at 11:15, staring at the ceiling. At 11:42, I heard the footsteps begin. I sat up, counted to 30. Then I opened my door. The hallway was dark except for the nightlight near the bathroom. I moved toward the stairs in the quiet way I'd learned during 30 years of climbing into attics and crawl spaces. Slow, deliberate, weight distributed toward the outside edges of each footfall. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned toward the laundry room. The light under the basement door was thin but definite, and voices, unmistakably, carried up through the wood. Derek's first, low and controlled, the tone he used when he was correcting someone. Then Claire's, higher, placating, the sound of someone trying to make themselves small enough not to take up space. I stood in that dark hallway for what felt like a long time, listening to something I couldn't fully hear but understood completely. Then Claire's voice rose just enough, not in anger, in pain. I took 3 steps toward the door and stopped myself. The same instinct that had saved me from making things worse in 100 workplace situations held me back now. If I burst through that door fueled by fury, what would Derek do? Not to me. To Claire, later, when I wasn't there, I turned around and went back upstairs. I did not sleep. The next morning, I waited until Derek left for work. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and waited for Claire. She came in wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat being on. She had foundation on the left side of her jaw that was slightly too dark for her skin, not a bruise covered. The coverage itself was the thing. "Sit down with me," I said. She sat. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. "I was in the hallway last night," I said. "I heard what was happening downstairs." The color left her face in one even motion, like a tide going out. "Daddy, I'm not angry with you. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I just need you to know that I know." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "And whatever is happening in this house, you are not alone in it." What came out of her then was not the composed, measured thing I'd braced myself for. It was weeks of held breath all at once. She pressed her hand over her mouth and made a sound I hadn't heard from her since she was 7 years old and had fallen off her bicycle. I sat with her through it. Didn't try to fix it, just sat with it. When she could talk, she told me about the last 3 years. Not all at once, and not in order, but the shape of it was clear. It had started small. Derek's criticisms, his corrections, the way he could make her feel like a student who kept failing a test with no clear rubric. Then, financial control had come in gradually. Joint accounts replaced by an allowance he approved each week. Her library volunteering wasn't volunteering. She'd taken a part-time shelving job to have 20 hours a week without him knowing her exact location. The money went into a prepaid card she kept in her car. The basement, she told me, was where he kept the things he didn't want questioned. Files, documents. And on the nights when she had, in his words, embarrassed him in some way, said the wrong thing to a dinner guest, or spent more than he'd allocated on groceries, or asked a question he felt she should already know the answer to, she was expected to accompany him down there and listen to a detailed accounting of her failures until he felt the matter had been sufficiently addressed. No physical marks from that, just the slow, deliberate erosion of a person. The bruise under the foundation was from 2 Sundays ago, when she'd disagreed with something he'd said in front of a colleague during a dinner party. I kept my voice very steady. "How long have you been planning to leave?" She looked at me. I didn't think I could. "What changed?" A long pause. "You're here," she said. "Someone is here who knows what I actually look like." We stayed at that table for 2 hours. I didn't propose anything, didn't outline a plan. I listened until she was ready to think, and then we thought together. The basement was where we started. Derek had given Claire a key when they moved in for emergencies, he'd said, though he checked her access log on a smart lock app on his phone. She showed me the app notification pattern on her own phone. He could see when the door opened, but only if he was actively watching. And Derek, we both knew, was confident enough in his control that he rarely checked things he assumed were secured. The following Thursday, while Derek was at a deposition that Claire knew from his calendar would run at least 4 hours, we went downstairs together. It was a finished basement. One side held exactly what Claire had described: storage, banker's boxes, filing cabinets. But Derek's desk sat in the corner, and on it, organized with the neatness of a man who trusted in his own systems, were things that made my hands go cold. There was a folder with my name on it. Inside were documents I did not recognize my signature on, a property management agreement transferring oversight of my Greenville house, which I'd left with a local manager to a firm I'd never heard of, with disbursement accounts I didn't know existed. There was correspondence with a financial advisor, also someone I'd never met, about redirecting my pension distributions, pending the account holder's consultation. The dates on some of the correspondence were from before I'd moved to Atlanta. He'd been planning this before I arrived. The invitation hadn't been about Claire's worry. It had been about getting me inside the perimeter. "Claire," I said, keeping my voice level, "does Derek have access to any of my financial information?" She had gone pale. "He asked me once for your social security number. He said it was for the insurance rider on his homeowner's policy, to add you as a resident." She paused. I gave it to him. We photographed everything. Every page of every document with the forged signatures, every piece of correspondence, the financial records. Claire had found, on a previous visit, a handwritten note in Derek's planner, names of attorneys, with fees and timelines noted beside them. A custody evaluation. One line read, "Though they had no children." Then beneath it, a name, Dr. Philip Arden, Psychological Services. Claire's hands went still when she saw it. "He took me to see Dr. Arden last spring," she said quietly. "He said it was couples therapy. Derek always spoke first. For a long time, I felt like I was being described, rather than seen." She didn't need to say the rest. I understood what a man like Derek would be building with a therapist's file on his wife. We put everything back exactly as we'd found it and locked the door behind us. That night I called my nephew Marcus, who'd been a family law paralegal in Charleston for 12 years. I explained the situation quietly from my car in the driveway with the engine running. He gave me a name, Patricia Osei, family law attorney in Midtown Atlanta, known for handling high-conflict separations against well-resourced spouses. I met with Patricia alone first, the following Monday while Derek was at work, and Claire was at the library, the real library this time, sitting in the parking lot on her phone, ready to call me if anything changed. I laid out what we had. Patricia was measured, precise, and did not waste a single word. "The financial documents are serious," she said. "That's elder financial abuse under Georgia statute, which is criminal, not just civil. The forged signatures give us leverage he won't expect." She looked at me steadily. "Is your daughter willing to leave?" "Yes," I said. "She is." "Then here is what we are going to do." The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. Claire and I became meticulous. She continued her routines without variation, laughed at Derek's jokes at dinner, kept the house the way he wanted it. I played the role of the contented, retired father-in-law, asked Derek about his cases, complimented his wine choices, acted like a man with nothing on his mind but his next woodworking project. Meanwhile, Claire opened a new account at a credit union on the other side of the city, depositing her library cash twice a week. She photographed her bruise documentation. She'd been keeping a private record on her phone in a folder disguised as a recipe app and transferred it to a secure cloud account Patricia's office had set up for us. I contacted my bank in Greenville directly and had my accounts flagged for unauthorized access. I drove to the property management company Derek had apparently transferred my Greenville house to and discovered, with the manager there, that the transfer documents were indeed forged. That manager called his lawyer before I was out of the parking lot. Patricia coordinated with a detective at the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She also connected us with the Fulton County Domestic Violence Advocacy Office, which assigned Claire a caseworker named Sandra, who had the kind of steady, unshockable calm that comes from having seen everything. We set a date for a Friday in December. The week before, I memorized the plan so thoroughly I could have recited it in my sleep. Claire would ask Derek for a formal meeting. She'd frame it as wanting to discuss their finances together, which would appeal to his need to believe he was always in control of financial conversation. She'd do it in the kitchen, at the island, with her phone in her pocket recording. Patricia would be standing by at her office. Sandra would be parked 2 blocks away. Detective Reyes from Financial Crimes would be down the street. And I would be in the living room, visible to Derek, within earshot. The night before, Claire and I sat on the back porch in the cold for nearly an hour. Neither of us said much. At some point, she reached over and took my hand the way she had when she was small, in parking lots, in doctors' offices, in the pew at her mother's funeral. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said. "Whatever happens," I agreed. Derek came home at 6:15. He was in a good mood, which made it harder in some ways and easier in others. He'd won a motion that afternoon, and he wanted to celebrate with a bottle of Burgundy he'd been saving. Claire opened it, poured his glass first. After dinner, while Derek was still at the table, Claire stood up and folded her hands in front of her. "Derek, I'd like to talk about something. Our finances. I've been feeling disconnected from our accounts, and I think it would help me to understand things better." He studied her for a moment. I watched his face make its calculations. "Sure," he said. "Let's do that." He stood up, gesturing toward his home office. "I'll show you the full picture." "I'd rather talk here," Claire said. "At the table." A pause. The smallest shift in his expression. "All right," he said, and sat back down. What followed was 8 minutes of Derek explaining their finances in the patient, slightly condescending tone of a man who believes the person across from him will never know more than he chooses to reveal. Claire asked quiet, specific questions, specific enough that Derek's patience began to thin. "Where does the disbursement from my father's pension go?" she asked. "The one you set up through the financial advisor." Derek stopped. The room was very quiet. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I have the documents," Claire said. "Downstairs, with your notes on them." What happened in the next 30 seconds happened faster than I could have prepared for. Derek stood up from his chair with a velocity that sent it scraping backward across the floor. His voice dropped into something that was barely a voice at all, a controlled, pressurized thing. "You went through my office." I stood up from the living room couch. "Derek." He turned toward me, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen before. Not anger exactly, but the collapse of a performance. The careful, tailored version of himself dropping away. "You had no right," he said to Claire. "Either of you." "I had every right," I said. "Those documents had my name on them." He took one step toward Claire. One step, and then the front door opened. Sandra came in first, because we'd left it unlocked. Detective Reyes and a uniformed officer came in behind her. Patricia was on the phone in my shirt pocket, listening to every word. Derek stood in the middle of his expensive kitchen and looked at the room he'd assembled around him, his house, his wife, her father, and understood, in the span of about 4 seconds, that he had misread every variable. "Derek Allen," Detective Reyes said, "I need you to step away from your wife." He was arrested that night on charges of elder financial abuse and fraud. The domestic violence charges came the following week, after Claire gave her full statement and Sandra's office submitted the documented evidence of the escalating coercion. The psychological manipulation file from Dr. Arden's office, once Claire requested her own records, showed entries that contradicted Derek's version of events in ways his attorney could not explain away cleanly. The court proceedings took 5 months. Patricia was, as advertised, very good. Derek's attorney argued that the financial documents were administrative errors, a miscommunication. The forged signatures, which a forensic document examiner testified had not been produced by my hand, argued otherwise. The judge, a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who had heard every version of every story, did not look persuaded by the miscommunication theory. Derek received 3 years for the financial crimes, plus a suspended sentence on the domestic abuse charges, contingent on completing a certified intervention program. The restraining order covered both Claire and me. My Greenville accounts were fully restored. The property management transfer was reversed. Claire got the house. She didn't want it. She sold it 8 months later and bought a smaller place in a neighborhood in Decatur, a craftsman bungalow with a covered porch and a backyard big enough for a real garden. The kitchen has good light in the mornings. There's a garage apartment above the detached garage that she had converted for me, with my own entrance, my own bathroom, my own workbench. I'm writing this from the workbench. There's a pine-side table I've been building for the porch, and through the garage window I can see Claire on the back steps with her coffee, reading. She reads differently now, not watching the door, not checking the driveway. Just reading. She started seeing a therapist named Dr. Amara Williams, who specializes in coercive control and has an office near the library where Claire still volunteers. For real this time. On Tuesdays and Thursdays. Claire says some weeks are harder than others. She says that honestly, without the smile that used to mean she didn't want me to worry. I'm not going to tell you that losing a son-in-law is easy. Derek had been part of my family for 6 years. I had stood beside him at their wedding. I had believed, for most of those 6 years, that he was a difficult but decent man who made my daughter happy. Being wrong about something that large is not a comfortable thing to carry. But I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed in Greenville, in my comfortable routines, and no one had ever heard those footsteps on the stairs. I think about the prescription for Claire that Derek had apparently already discussed with Dr. Arden, mood stabilizers, to address her anxiety. I think about the custody evaluation paperwork prepared for a child they didn't have yet, which Patricia's reading of it suggested was designed to preemptively establish grounds long before Claire had any idea what was being built around her. He had been patient and thorough. He had planned it the way he planned everything, methodically, from a position of assumed control. What he hadn't planned for was me noticing, not because I'm particularly clever. I spent my career making sure electrical current had nowhere to go that it shouldn't. You learn, doing that work, that the most dangerous conditions are the ones that look normal from the outside. A wire that seems fine until you test it. A connection that holds until it doesn't. The damage is always happening before you see it. The skill is learning to look at things that look fine and ask what you're not seeing yet. I'm 68 years old. I've lost a wife and nearly lost a daughter and found, in the end, that family is not the same thing as a house you all live in. Claire is my family. This garage apartment, with its pine shavings and its window that looks out on the back steps where my daughter is quietly reading on a Tuesday morning, is more home than the Colonial in Buckhead ever managed to be. If you're watching from somewhere tonight where things look fine on the outside but something underneath doesn't add up, trust that instinct. It took me 3 weeks to trust mine, and 3 weeks was almost too long. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if any part of this story felt familiar to you, not the details, but the feeling, know that familiar doesn't have to mean permanent. Leave a like if this story reached you. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. Sometimes the most useful thing one person can do is hand something true to someone else at the right moment. I'm Walter. I'm 68, and I'm still learning what family actually means. Thank you for sitting with this